The following podcast contains discussions of... Actually, this one's almost pure. There is mention of child abuse and an inappropriate relationship, but it's not really part of the plot. Anyway, spoilers as usual. Lots of spoilers. Ready? Let's dig in. Do you ever look at yourself in the mirror and want to change one thing? Just one thing. Your nose, your eyebrows, your chubby cheeks. If you could change that one thing, you'd be perfect. For Anne, it's her red hair. She can deal with her freckles or being too pale and too skinny, but her red hair is awful. It's her lifelong sorrow. Why couldn't she be a queenly blonde or a gorgeous brunette? Instead, she has this ugly red mop that gets her called things like carrots from horrible boys like Gilbert Blythe. The empty bottle of hair dye rolls on her dresser table. She had spent 50 cents on it. It was all the money she had in the world, and the peddler had promised it would make her hair a beautiful raven black, like Diana's. It was the miraculous solution she had wished for all her life. And on the one hand, at least her hair isn't red anymore. On the other, it's green. So green. Anne, girl, be careful what you wish for. But honestly, who here can relate to DIY hair experiments gone wrong? You can't see it, but I'm raising my hand. Anyway, I'm Gabby and this is Digestibles, a podcast about all the books you were told to read but probably didn't. And today, we are going to talk about one of the most beloved heroines in classic children's literature, Anne of Green Gables. Now, Anne's a bit of a hard character to summarize. Her personality shines through in the way that she talks, and she talks a lot. I mean, the girl has no filter. She's imaginative and romantic and, yes, overly dramatic, which is often funny and sometimes annoying. Okay, mostly annoying, but somehow still lovable. Totally relatable. I get you. I'm like that. There's a reason why hundreds of thousands of tourists from all over the world flock to Prince Edward Island in Canada just to catch a whiff of the atmosphere where the book is set. Or, well, at least they did before the apocalypse that seems to be happening right now. But that's the awesome thing about books. We don't need a plane ride or a visa. The book's our ticket, and like Anne, all we need is a healthy imagination. So, come with me and let's travel to the 19th century and tiny fictional town of Avonlea. Spotted. Matthew Cuthbert wearing his best suit and driving down the main road out of town. It's a busy afternoon and Mrs. Rachel Lynde is a gossip girl, so she needs to know exactly what Matthew is up to. Good thing her BFF is his sister Marilla. She goes up to the Cuthberts' farm, called Green Gables, to get the scoop. The siblings are getting old. Matthew's 60. So they're adopting a boy from the orphanage to help out with the farm work. You sure you want to adopt some random kid? Asks Rachel. He might be, damaged. Marilla's like, it's risky and all, but as long as it's not a girl. Spoiler alert, it's a girl. And no one is more surprised than Matthew. When he arrives at the train station, he finds it empty of any children except for one red-headed, freckled girl in an ugly dress and a straw hat. She's about 11 years old with big eyes and an even bigger mouth. They have made a terrible mistake, thinks Matthew. He's a shy, quiet man who doesn't quite know what to do with a strange little girl child. Matthew's afraid of little girls. Well, I mean, he is afraid of women in general. He doesn't have much experience with them except for his sister Marilla. Oh, Marilla! She'll know what to do. So, Matthew takes the child home with him.
Well, that is one of the things to find out sometime. Isn't it splendid to think of all the things there are to find out about? It just makes me feel glad to be alive. It's such an interesting world. It wouldn't be half so interesting if we know all about everything, would it? There'd be no scope for imagination then, would there? But am I talking too much? People are always telling me I do. Would you rather I didn't talk? If you say so, I'll stop. I can stop when I make up my mind to it, although it's difficult. Matthew, much to his own surprise, was enjoying himself. Like most quiet folks, he liked talkative people when they were willing to do the talking themselves and did not expect him to keep up his end of it. But he had never expected to enjoy the society of a little girl. Women were bad enough in all conscience, but little girls were worse. He detested the way they had of sidling past him timidly with sidewise glances, as if they expected him to gobble them up at a mouthful if they ventured to say a word. That was the Avonlea type of well-bred little girl, but this freckled witch was very different. And although he found it rather difficult for a slower intelligence to keep up with her brisk mental processes, he thought that he kind of liked her chatter.
Throughout the drive, the girl starts to rename the world around her. Barry's Pond becomes the Lake of Shining Waters. The road turns into the White Way of Delight. Matthew can barely keep up, but he lets her talk. When they arrive, the girl enters the house all hopeful, but Marilla takes one look at the girl's thick red braids and is like, no, they need a boy. This tiny thing can't help with the farm work. The girl starts to cry when she realizes she's not wanted. Marilla tries to comfort her, but like her brother, she's helpless in the presence of so much emotion. She asks the child what her name is. At first, she says it's Cordelia, but after a bit of questioning, the child says it's Anne. Anne with an E, to be exact. They serve dinner, but Anne can't eat a bite. She's in the depths of despair. Later, she cries herself to sleep. Matthew wants to keep Anne, but it's hard to convince Marilla. At breakfast, Anne talks. She talks and talks and talks until Marilla tells her to shut up, but the silence is worse. Marilla tells Anne to get ready. They're going to make a visit to the woman who arranged the adoption. As they leave, Matthew tells Marilla he's hired a boy to help out for the summer, hinting that he really wants Anne to stay. Marilla asks Anne about her history. Anne doesn't want to talk about it as she says it's boring. She'd rather talk about the things she imagines herself to be. That's much more interesting. But Marilla asks, and in a nutshell, Anne's parents were poor school teachers who died of a fever when Anne was a baby. She was passed on from family to family, basically only there to serve them as a sort of unpaid nanny. Marilla starts to feel bad for her. It's hinted throughout the book that Anne's former foster families were not very good to her. They neglected her education and malnourished her. One guardian was even a drunkard and violent. So, Anne's life wasn't exactly boring, it was more sad. Her imagination and romanticism is likely a coping mechanism. Her life had been ugly so far, which is why she wants to fill it as much as possible with beautiful things. The woman who arranged the adoption is, she's no help. She suggests Marilla give the child to a Mrs. Blewett, who's mean and miserable and will only make Anne work like her other families did. She wouldn't wish this on any child, and she can see that Anne is scared, so she decides to take her home with her. Marilla tells Matthew that Anne can stay as long as she's in charge of all the parenting. She thinks it's her duty to turn this wild child into a good Christian girl. Except, Anne is kinda mad at God because he made her a redhead on purpose. Nevertheless, Marilla persists and she teaches Anne how to pray.
Gracious Heavenly Father, I thank Thee for the White Way of Delight and the Lake of Shining Waters, and Bonnie and the Snow Queen. I'm really extremely grateful for them. And that's all the blessings I can think of just now to thank Thee for. As for the things I want, they're so numerous that it would take a great deal of time to name them all, so I will only mention the two most important. Please let me stay at Green Gables, and please let me be good-looking when I grow up. I remain, yours respectfully, Anne Shirley.
The next day, Marilla gives Anne some chores to do. She discovers Anne is smart and obedient, a quick learner. Her only fault is that she gets distracted easily by stuff. That afternoon, Marilla tells Anne she can stay and Anne bursts into tears. Anne and Marilla are completely different in every way. Anne is all heart and daydreams. Marilla is endlessly practical and doesn't have time for emotions. For example, Anne wants to call her Aunt Marilla, but Marilla won't let her because it simply isn't true. Kinda the opposite of us Filipinos and our abundance of titas. So their first date together is a bit of a mess, and at the end, Marilla's exhausted. Anne, in the meantime, is happy. She doesn't have to imagine herself as Cordelia, and she's not Anne of Nowhere anymore. She's Anne of Green Gables. If Anne and Marilla's personalities clash, just wait till she meets Marilla's BFF Rachel Lynde. Remember her? Gossip Girl? Well, she pays Green Gables a visit to check on this random child and shove her opinions on Marilla's lack of qualifications to become a parent. Just so you know, Marilla's a spinster, meaning she never got married. Rachel calls Anne skinny, ugly, and compares her hair to carrots. All of that to Anne's face. Anne's hair is her, hair trigger, and she immediately claps back. She calls Rachel rude and also fat, ugly with no imagination. Marilla sends Anne to her room and tells her to apologize. Anne won't. She would rather be grounded forever than say she's sorry. She spends the next day in her room and doesn't eat a thing. Finally, a worried Matthew sneaks in and asks her just to do what Marilla asks because he misses her. Anne agrees because she'll do anything for Matthew. Aww. Later, when Marilla brings her over to Rachel Lynde, Anne kneels down and does a super dramatic apology because Anne has no chill, and when she commits to do something, the girl commits. Mrs. Lynde has no choice but to forgive her. On the way home, Anne holds Marilla's hand and Marilla feels almost warm inside. Oh no, are these feelings? She quickly ignores that feeling though. Now that Anne's a bit settled, it's time for her to meet the rest of the townsfolk. She's disappointed with her new clothes because they're not pretty. She wants to have dresses with puffed sleeves, but Marilla doesn't see the problem with plain clothes. Anne decides to put flowers in her hair to prettify herself and happily goes to Sunday school. But when she gets there, all the girls are wearing puffed sleeves. Plus, they think that her hat is ridiculous. On the way home, Anne throws the flowers away. A short note on puffed sleeves. The book is set in the late 1800s where puffed sleeves were the fashionable thing. Like, huge. Literally, the puffier the better. And because fashion is a cycle, they've made a comeback. In the year of our Lord 2020, they're definitely a fashion trend. Don't take my word for it, just check out Pinterest. Also, puffed sleeves, flower crowns, green hair. Anne would totally be an Instagram influencer by now. You know what? I have all that. Puff sleeves, flower crowns, and green hair. I could do that. I'm kidding. A few days later, Marilla takes Anne next door to introduce her to Diana Barry, a girl her age. Anne is nervous because she wants a friend. A bosom friend, to be exact. A kindred spirit she can tell everything to. Matthew's already a kindred spirit, by the way. She just needs someone her own age. Diana's a pretty young girl with black hair, black eyes, and a ready smile. When they meet, she's reading a book, so it's already a good sign. Soon, the girls are joining hands and swearing to be BFFs forever. Diana thinks Anne's a strange girl, but she likes her. They like each other very much indeed. Next Sunday, there's a picnic, and Anne is super excited. She's so excited she talks for 10 minutes straight without breathing. Marilla's curious and asks her if she can stay silent for just as long. Yeah, Marilla, do you even know her? Marilla's scared that Anne wants too many things and is destined for disappointment. Anne thinks expecting things is half the fun and better than expecting nothing from life. Well, as for me, I expect nothing and yet I am always disappointed. Disappointed but not surprised. Anyway, there's a bit of a misunderstanding with Marilla. She thinks Anne took her favorite brooch, her prized possession. Anne admits she lost it just so she can go to the picnic, but she's still grounded. Later, Marilla finds it caught on one of her shawls and apologizes to Anne. Anne goes to the picnic and everyone's happy again. Anne starts going to school. She's behind compared to the others, but eager to catch up. If only her teacher wasn't a creep who keeps making heart eyes at one of his students. I mean, teachers were really young then, probably around 18, but still, ew. Diana warns Anne about a boy called Gilbert Blythe. He's tall, smart, handsome, and he teases all the girls. But he's quite dreamy, really. Also, an older man. Almost 14 to their 11. He skipped a couple of years of school because he had to take care of his sick father. When Gilbert first sees Anne, he winks at her. Anne thinks this isn't good manners and ignores him. But Gilbert isn't used to being ignored, so he pulls Anne's braid and calls her carrots. Yeah, you know where this is going. Never, ever, 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 ever tease Anne about her red hair. Triggered, Anne stands up and calls Gilbert a mean, hateful boy and cracks her writing slate over his head. Ouch. Gilbert tries to take the blame, but the teacher punishes Anne by making her stand in front of the class with a note written on the blackboard behind her. Anne Shirley has a very bad temper. Anne Shirley must learn to control her temper. After school, Gilbert tries to apologize to Anne. He's very, very sorry.
Anne swept by disdainfully without look or sign of hearing. "Oh, how could you, Anne?" breathed Diana as they went down the road half reproachfully, half admiringly. Diana felt that she could never have resisted Gilbert's plea. "I shall never forgive Gilbert Blythe," said Anne firmly. "And Mr. Phillips spelled my name without an E too. The iron has entered into my soul, Diana." Diana hadn't the least idea what Anne meant, but she understood it was something terrible.
The next day, Anne is late to school, so the teacher makes her sit with the boys. And of course, the only empty seat is beside Gilbert. Anne spends the rest of the day with her face buried in her arms on the desk, not moving one single inch, even when the teacher calls her to recite. Well, she does move once. Gilbert tries to give her a candy heart with the words, "You are sweet," on it. Anne picks it up carefully, drops it to the floor, and stomps her foot on it without once looking at Gilbert. Ah, Gilbert, man, you blew it big time. After school, Anne cleans up her desk and goes home telling Marilla she'll never go back to school again. Marilla's worried, but Rachel advises her to just let it blow over. You know kids. But it doesn't. September turns to October and Anne is still hanging at home. Marilla leaves town for a meeting, so she allows Anne to invite Diana over for some tea. Marilla also left them a special drink in the pantry. It's called raspberry cordial, and it's sweet, sugary, and bright red. Diana likes the cordial very much. She's drinking glass after glass, and suddenly she stands. She's feeling ill and dizzy and can't walk in a straight line. Anne walks her home. A couple of days later, Anne comes home in tears. Diana's mother is angry with Anne after getting her daughter drunk. Marilla suddenly remembers she put wine in the pantry and the cordial somewhere else. They go to the Barrys' house to explain, and Anne makes one of her dramatic apologies, but Mrs. Barry won't let Diana see Anne anymore. Bummer. Diana sneaks out the next afternoon to meet Anne, and they say their tearful goodbyes. Anne decides to go back to school so she can at least see Diana. Anne becomes a good student, partly because she wants to beat Gilbert at everything, and he's number 1 in the class. Soon, there's a friendly rivalry between them. Well, I mean, on Gilbert's side it's friendly. On Anne's side, it's the total opposite. She's determined to destroy him, academically speaking. Anne's ride or die in hate and in love. It's January now. Marilla's away and Anne's with Matthew at home. She wants to read a novel but has to do her geometry homework or else Gilbert will get ahead. Diana arrives crying because her younger sister has a bad croup. High fever, cough, and trouble breathing. Yikes. Her parents are away and the babysitter doesn't know what to do. Matthew goes to get the doctor and Anne goes to help Diana. She used to care for younger kids in her foster homes, so she knows what to do. She gives little sis some medicine that will help her cough up the phlegm and stays with her until the doctor comes. When the Barrys arrive, the doctor tells them that Anne saved their child's life. The next afternoon, Mrs. Barry allows Diana to see Anne again. Yay! In February, Diana invites Anne to go to a concert and have a sleepover with her for her birthday. Marilla won't let Anne go, but Matthew eventually persuades her by saying, "I think you ought to let Anne go," over and over until she relents. The concert is fun and Anne enjoys herself until Gilbert goes on stage to perform a poem. She picks up a book and pretends to read until he finishes and doesn't clap. Later, Diana says Gilbert was looking straight at Anne while reciting a line about loving, quote, "another, not a sister. How can she not forgive him yet? Cruel woman." Anne's like, "I love you, but let's not talk about he who must be named anymore, okay?" Still in high spirits, they race and jump on the bed in the spare room of Diana's house. Unfortunately, someone's already sleeping on it. It's Diana's Aunt Josephine. She's pissed and the next day threatens to stop paying for Diana's music lessons. Anne goes over and makes one of her over-the-top apologies, which amuses Aunt Josephine. She forgives Diana as long as Anne keeps visiting her. Turns out, Aunt Josephine is a kindred spirit too.
After the Mayflowers came the violets, and Violet Vale was empurpled with them. Anne walked through it on her way to school with reverent steps and worshipping eyes, as if she trod on holy ground. "Somehow," she told Diana, "what I'm going through here, I don't really care whether anybody gets ahead of me in class or not. But when I'm up in school, it's all different, and I care as much as ever. There's such a lot of different Annes in me. I sometimes think that is why I'm such a troublesome person. If I was just the one Anne, it would be ever so much more comfortable. But then, it wouldn't be half so interesting."
Okay, the next few chapters, Anne has a couple more hijinks, including Anne walking through what she thinks is a haunted forest because Marilla wants to cure her of her belief of ghosts. That goes as well as you would expect. Anne baking a cake with cold medicine instead of vanilla. Yum. And Anne breaking her ankle because Josie Pye dared her to walk on the ridgepole, basically the highest point of a roof on Diana's house. That last thing has Marilla super scared, by the way, and she realizes how much she's come to love Anne. Soon, it's Christmas time in Avonlea. Anne has a new school teacher whom she loves because she's way better than the old one. The kids are preparing a recital and Anne is chosen to do a solo. Matthew sees Anne with her friends practicing and notices that she's dressed plainly compared to the other girls. He decides he'll get Anne a dress for Christmas. In town, he goes to the stores but can't bring up his courage to speak to the sales ladies. Remember, he's shy and scared of women, so he ends up buying a lot of useless things instead of a dress. He goes to Rachel Lynde and she's happy to help. Anne cries when she sees the dress. It's perfect, puffed sleeves and all. She also gets new shoes from Aunt Josephine so she'll look so good when she performs in the concert. Matthew and Marilla also talk about Anne's future and where to send her to school in a couple of years. Anne turns 13. In class, they have an assignment to write a story. Of course, Anne's already finished hers, but Diana is having trouble. They decide to start a story club to practice writing. They invite 2 other friends to join. Later, Anne tells Marilla that Ruby's stories are too romantic. Rather like the pot calling the kettle black there, Anne. Jane's stories are too sensible, while Diana's stories have too many murders because she doesn't know what to do with her characters, so she just kills them instead. They send their stories to Aunt Josephine, who's very much amused with them. Time passes. One day, Marilla goes home expecting Anne to be doing chores and is annoyed when she's not. She finds Anne hiding under her blankets in bed. She doesn't want to go. Why? Because Anne's hair is green. Apparently, she met a peddler and he sales-talked her into buying a dye that'll make her hair black. Poor Anne got scammed. She tries to wash the dye out but can't, so Marilla has no choice but to cut Anne's hair. I guess Anne has a pixie cut now. Anne promises to stop being so vain. Time passes again. Anne and her friends decide to act out Tennyson's poem Lancelot and Elaine. Basically, Elaine's a lady in love with Lancelot, but as we know, he's in love with Guinevere. You might want to check out our episode on Lancelot and Guinevere on that. Anyway, Elaine dies because of unrequited love or starvation because of unrequited love or something. And her body is put on a boat and floated down a river with a note saying, "F you, Lancelot." Okay, fine, it doesn't say that, but it should have. It really should have. Anne is playing Elaine, of course, and she spends a lovely moment floating down the river pretending to be dead until the boat starts to leak. Anne grabs onto a pole under a bridge before the boat sinks, but she is stuck. From a distance, Anne's friends see the boat sink and they panic because they think she's drowned. They run away screaming internally and probably externally too. Meanwhile, Anne's holding on for dear life and her arms are beginning to cramp. Just before she thinks she's about to let go, someone comes rowing under the bridge. And who else could it be but Gilbert Blythe? He helps Anne, who still refuses to look at him and barely speaks to him. He tries to apologize again. He tells her he thinks her hair is pretty and why can't they be friends now? Anne's heart skips a beat, but she also flashbacks to the moment he called her carrots. She says no, they'll never be friends. Gilbert gets angry too and says he doesn't care and he'll never ask her to be friends again. Yeah, you keep thinking that, Gil. Anne's friends find her and everyone's relieved except for Marilla, who's annoyed at Anne for not acting sensibly again.
Well, explained Anne, I've learned a new and valuable lesson today. Ever since I came to Green Gables, I've been making mistakes, and each mistake has helped to cure me of some great shortcoming. The affair of the amethyst brooch cured me of meddling with things that didn't belong to me. The haunted wood mistake cured me of letting my imagination run away with me. The liniment cake mistake cured me of carelessness in cooking. Dyeing my hair cured me of vanity. I never think about my hair and nose now. At least, very seldom. And today's mistake is going to cure me of being too romantic. I have come to the conclusion that it is no use trying to be romantic in Avonlea. It was probably easy enough in Towered Camelot hundreds of years ago, but romance is not appreciated now. I feel quite sure that you will soon see a great improvement in me in this respect, Marilla.
I'm sure I hope so, said Marilla skeptically.
But Matthew, who had been sitting mutely in his corner, laid a hand on Anne's shoulder when Marilla had gone out.
Don't give up all your romance, Anne, he whispered shyly. A little of it is a good thing. Not too much, of course. But keep a little of it, Anne. Keep a little of it.
Let's fast forward a bit. Anne's teacher invites Anne to join a special class. They're preparing for entrance exams to Queen's. It's a school that offers a 2-year teacher's certificate. Anne wasn't planning on going to an academy, but is thrilled and grateful when she learns that Marilla and Matthew put money aside for her higher education. Diana's parents won't let her go to Queen's, though. They have other plans for her. Since they're richer, it's probably finishing school, which focuses less on academics and more on how to make girls into good ladies and good wives. But Gilbert plans to go, and he also joins the class. He hasn't spoken to Anne since he rescued her by the river. Anne regrets it, but will never say this to Gilbert. She's a bit grown up now. She's more helpful and less distracted. She even stops using big words just because they sound more romantic. But it doesn't make her less competitive. She's studying hard for the exams because she wants to beat whatever Gilbert's score is. Too bad they're super well matched. 3 weeks after the exam, the results are out and Gilbert and Anne have tied for first place. A while later, Anne is asked to recite at another concert. Backstage, she overhears a mean girl making fun of her. So when it's her turn, She has a sudden attack of stage fright. But suddenly, she sees Gilbert in the audience and is resolved not to fail in front of him. It works, and she performs so well, people ask for an encore. The novel fast-forwards through the years at Queen's. Maybe because it's less exciting than Anne's childhood antics. One thing doesn't change, though. Anne and Gilbert are still fighting to be top of the class. Anne also hears that he's dating Ruby now, but she doesn't care. She's too busy studying for the Avery Scholarship, which will give her an all-expenses-paid pass to Redmond College and a BA degree. She also wants to finish her teacher's certificate in a year instead of 2. When graduation arrives, Gilbert gets valedictorian, but Anne wins the Avery Scholarship. Anne goes home to Green Gables. She's reunited with Diana, who tells her all the town gossip. Apparently, Gilbert can't afford college, so he'll be teaching in Avonlea. Anne wonders what she'll do without him pushing her to be her best. We also find out that Marilla's eyesight has been failing and Matthew's health hasn't been that good. Uh-oh. Anne talks to him one night and wishes she was a boy so she can help more, but Matthew says he'd rather have his Anne than a dozen boys. Aww. The next morning, Matthew collapses and dies of a heart attack before the doctor arrives. Anne is distraught, but for some reason, she can't cry. In the middle of the night, she wakes up and starts crying. Marilla goes to her room and cries with her. Sometime after the funeral, Marilla and Anne are talking about things like her red hair. Anne is okay with it now. And of all things, Gilbert Blythe. She tells Anne she used to be courted by his father, but they had an argument and Marilla couldn't forgive him. She kinda regrets that. She doesn't want Anne to be too proud that she regrets things too. A while later, Marilla finally gets her eyes checked. The doctor tells her that she'll be blind in 6 months if she's not careful. Marilla decides to sell Green Gables. Anne doesn't want her to, and she's decided to decline the Avery Scholarship and find a teaching job in the next town so she can be close to home and help out. Marilla doesn't want her to make the sacrifice, but Anne assures her that she still has plans and ambitions. She only has to bend them a little bit. A few days later, Rachel Lynde visits. She tells Anne that the trustees have decided to offer her the teaching job in Avonlea. But didn't they give it to Gilbert? Anne asks. Well, Gilbert declined the job offer for Anne, so she can stay in Green Gables. The next night, Anne visits Matthew's grave and puts fresh flowers on it. While walking home, she bumps into Gilbert. He moves to pass by without speaking, but Anne stops him and thanks him for what he did. She holds out her hand. Gilbert takes it and they shake hands. Has Anne finally forgiven him? Are they friends now? Yes, they are. He walks her home and they stand in front of her gate for half an hour just talking. Marilla's surprised to see it. Anne says they've been good enemies, but they've decided it's much more sensible to be good friends. They just needed to catch up.
Anne sat long at her window that night, companioned by a glad content. The wind purred softly in the cherry boughs, and the mid-breaths came up to her. The stars twinkled over the pointed firs in the hollow, and Diana's light gleamed through the old gap. Anne's horizons had closed in since the night she had sat there after coming home from Queen's. But if the path set before her fate was to be narrow, she knew that flowers of quiet happiness would bloom along it. The joy of sincere work and worthy aspiration and congenial friendship were to be hers. Nothing could rob her of her birthright of fancy or her ideal world of dreams. And there was always the bend in the road. God's in his heaven. All's right with the world, whispered Anne softly.
The Irish call it Anam Cara, from the Gaelic words soul and friend. It's the ancient Celtic belief in the spiritual bond between two souls. Now, it's hard to find sources of its origin, but we can trace the use of the words back to a 9th century text called Martyrology of Angus. Yeah, I'm really sorry. I don't know how to pronounce that properly. I think it's Martyrology of Angus? Anyway, he's basically this Irish bishop who said, anyone without a soul friend is like a body without a head. The Greeks also have a concept called philia. Greek philosopher Aristotle calls friendship a virtue that is, and I quote, most necessary with a view to living. For without friends, no one would choose to live. He believed that a friend is another self who holds up a mirror and reflects your soul and vice versa. Now, we have a lot more words that we use to describe an instant, almost spiritual connection between two people. There's BFF, spirit animal, brother from another mother, sister from another mister, even soulmate, though that's used in a more romantic sense. Personally, I believe that soulmates are a little more than a romantic connection, and that you can find them in the people you choose to be around. A soul family, if you will. And of course, Anne, and the author Lucy Maud Montgomery would call it a kindred spirit. Someone who can read your inmost thoughts without any words. Someone you can share and confide anything with. Though the book ends on a somewhat sad note, with Matthew dying, we know Anne will be okay because she's got her kindred spirits with her. Diana, Aunt Josephine, Marilla, hell, even Gilbert. Because, as Anne says, kindred spirits are not so scarce as I used to think. It's splendid to find out there are so many of them in the world. Thank you for listening! I hope I made Anne of Green Gables a little bit easier to digest. I'm Gabby, and you can find me at Gabby Pascovox on Instagram and Twitter, or use the hashtag Digestibles Podcast. Special thanks to Merrick for providing the narrations, and Jazz for composing our theme music. Digestibles is part of Connect, a podcast network, bringing together entertaining stories to spark your imagination. For more awesome content, follow us on social media at Connect Podcasts, Connect Podcasts, Connect Podcasts, Connect Podcasts, Connect Podcasts.